So, why do Christians really give to Israel? Quick spoiler, it's not to do the Jews a favor. This conversation is with Heather Johnston, and if you've ever wondered what actually drives Christian support for Israel at a deep level, then Heather is one of the clearest windows you're going to get into this world. Quick heads up before we jump in. Heather is a woman of deep faith. Her language, her frames of reference are straight out of Scripture. That might seem unfamiliar or uncomfortable to those who do not share her faith or worldview. But if you listen carefully, you'll gain direct insight into what moves millions of people from belief to action. And Heather's story is a story of action. She founded the Ariel National Leadership Center with the late Mayor Ron Nachman, which has since hosted over 130,000 trainees. It's a national platform developing leadership through values, responsibility, and life experience. Heather also founded the U.S.-Israel Education Association, through which she opens doors to American congresspeople to see Israel beyond the standard itinerary on both sides of the Green Line. Here's my conversation with Heather Johnston, someone who has made a lifelong commitment to give. What if the way you give says more about who you are than anything else? I'm Avi Zimmerman, giving coach, strategist, and lifelong student. And this is You Are What You Give, a podcast about generosity, purpose, and fascinating people. Thank you for joining us on the journey of a life worth living. Heather Johnston, what a pleasure and honor to have you here on the program with us. Thank you for giving of your time and your effort, as always, and being part of You Are What You Give. This story, as I see it, will hopefully give our listeners, subscribers, an opportunity to get a glimpse into your world of faith in a way that they've not before. Some people might be familiar with similar faith perspectives, but really, you've done some phenomenal things in Israel that nobody else has done. And I really think that your story needs to be shared. But before we share that story, maybe the first kind of stage of that story, something that you told me once, and I heard it from you, and I heard it from your husband, Bruce, about how at a very early stage, the two of you really dedicated yourselves to a life of service.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did, and I think our marriage has been marked by that. I think we've had a real purpose to what we're doing in this life. We have lived by a God purpose, a real sense of wanting to be extremely connected to Him in everything that we're doing, and for Him to be that guiding light, that source of strength and direction for us. And I think that we would have been very sad to come to the end of our life or halfway through our life and feel like that we were not living a life on purpose. Avi, I recall back when we felt like God was asking us to write out a check. That is a check, a handwritten check, and to just write out a check for everything we owned and just to make it out to Him. So we wrote it in the blank. We both signed it.
You wrote everything we own.
Everything we own. We wrote it in the blank there. And it was just a symbolic but extremely important step that we took to help God understand that we really did mean this. And that we really wanted to take everything in our lives and bring it up underneath His lordship, that He would have control of our lives. He would get to guide us. He got to show us what to do, how to apply resources, how we should use our talents, how we should use our time and our treasure. Well, that was a big, big step for us. That opened a door, and God took that seriously. You know, sometimes you do things and you're like, I wonder if this means something. It meant something to Him. And I think it was really from that point that we began to see so many doors open where He began to lead us into a real servant leadership role inside the state of Israel, inside the United States, and even in different parts of the world.
So this is going to be such an amazing journey for our subscribers to get a sense of what does that mean to have this relationship not only with God, but with Israel. And before we step into that journey and understanding what it is that you've brought to the table, just let's quickly note, this idea that purpose and giving are almost interchangeable. You decided you wanted to live a purposeful life, and that led you to write a check for everything that you own. Talk about giving, right? It's like this intuitive, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't sound to me like you analyze what does it mean to be purposeful and giving. But intuitively, I think we know that when we want to live a life of purpose, it's really not about us. It's really about giving. It's really about contributing to the world around us. And I think that's just so intuitively insightful and helpful for us to frame the conversation about how someone, Christian, living in Alabama, is going to really embrace Israel in a way that's going to contribute, to give in a way that's never been seen before. So thank you, Heather, for that. And with that, let's jump into understanding this world of Heather and Bruce Johnston. Heather, there's a lot to talk about, but I want to start with this connection that you have with Israel. I live in Israel. I live in a city called Ariel. And I met you in Ariel, again, more than 15 years ago. But more than a history lesson, just if you can frame for our listeners, why is it that you, someone who grew up in Alabama, lives in Alabama, has chosen to partner with Israel?
Well, I think that my husband, Bruce, and I, back in 1997, we were, living in Birmingham, Alabama, and we were in California in the summers at JH Ranch that we own, and we run programs for parents and teens and leadership programs. And I think it was back then that we really began to understand the prophecies long awaited that were anticipated by God that were unfolding inside the nation of Israel. And further than that, I think we understood that God wanted Gentile participation. He wanted people to cooperate with him at that time and to serve that vision that he had. And so we just began to look for ways to do that. That was kind of the bottom line.
Can I stop you there for a moment, Heather? Because we've had these conversations before, and I've seen how your story mesmerizes all sorts of groups, and not just people who are necessarily faith-oriented, but even members of Congress whom you bring to Israel on delegations, and hopefully we'll have some time to talk about that. But just a step back, what does that mean, prophecy in our day or coming true and being fulfilled? I'm not speaking necessarily to the skeptic, but someone who's unfamiliar with that form of framing the world that we live in today. Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Absolutely. I think that I have a theological background and I have my master's in theology. And so in studying the Abrahamic covenant, which is the one eternal covenant that God made, and he did it very, very simply with a particular people who were going to be living in a particular land that would bring the blessings to the world. And so that irrevocable eternal covenant made with Abraham is the theme of all of the scriptures. It's the headwater for every other covenant that would come forth. And so it really begins there. And if you can understand that eternal covenant with the Jewish people who are living in a particular land, then it leads you through the course of exiles and the corrections God made with this group of people. But it also anticipates a time when Israel would come out of exile, out of 2,000 years of exile, returning back to the land of Israel from the four quarters of the earth. Well, that is a prophecy that was spoken of by most of the prophets, really, is that there was this understanding there would be a day of returning. Well, in our generation and the generation just previous to us, that is exactly what's happened. So that became a signal to so many people around the world. Well, this is that which was spoken of by Jeremiah, Isaiah, Moses. Everybody actually foresaw a return into the land. And so I think those prophecies are not something that are just sort of out in the future. these are the ones that we can look at now out of a bus driving through Israel and go, wow, the land did burst into bloom for them. The cities have been rebuilt. The Jews are back from the four quarters of the earth. So that's what I'm talking about.
So I love hearing this from you because I live here, and it's easy to have a strong bias to where I live and the Jewish experience, where it's been and where we are today. But to hear of it from someone who doesn't live here and is yet has committed themselves to what's going on here, I think is amazing. And just pause for thought. But in addition, what I'm hearing from you, and I'm not putting words into your mouth, Heather, I will just say quickly, there's a lot of folks will say podcasts should be basically about anything except for religion and politics. Well, we don't really take that policy here. We're comfortable with both. And yet I'm not leaning into the politics, but I will say that there's lots of folks who don't like this notion of the Jewish return to the land of Israel. You don't have to be, a scholar to see what goes on in the United Nations each and every single day. For them, perhaps, the presence of the Jewish people in the land of Israel is more of an anomaly. The norm is the exile, and the anomaly is this return. But what I'm hearing from you is that, no, actually, the exile is already part of the plan. It's part of the plan as a precursor to the return. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And, we can see it very, very clearly in Deuteronomy 28, where Moses really predicts these exiles. He predicts two of them. I mean, it is undeniably clear what those would look like. And one would be the dispersion to the four quarters of the earth. One would be into Babylon. These were predicted, and the Jewish people had to sing about these exiles. They had to chant what it would be like to actually go into exile. Exile was to be out of the favor of God. It's terrible.
Yeah, those are not.
To be out of the land was to be out of favor. To come back into the land is to be in favor. And so I think that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, those are not pretty verses. Those are not pretty passages at all. In fact, they're actually very graphic and very frightening. And unfortunately, they've all come true. But then again, as you said, so the prophecy of the return to the land has come true as well. So, and to be, put it very, very simply, I've had many a time Christians come over to me and say that they know that their scripture is true because I and my neighborhood, my community, because we are living out the realization of prophecy today. So that may or may not resonate with the folks on the other end of the screen, but that's where you're coming from, Heather, and you're not only looking at this from afar. Again, you're engaging with this head on. And so what does that look like? You've had this relationship with the city of Ariel where I live. Of course, this is where we met, but you've done some phenomenal projects here that I really don't know of any other Christian group that has managed to make such a, I would say, formidable collaboration with, on the one hand, a mutual respect of the different cultural and religious differences between the communities, and on the other hand, this major impact that's really impacted more than 100,000 people, perhaps with the ripple effect even more. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And, Avi, back to that original point, I think that people tend to, just across the gamut, we can ask the wrong question over and over and over again for about 100 years. And so much of the world today is asking that question, should Israel be in the land?
Yeah.
But the right question to ask is, why are they in the land? And to ask the question, why are they in the land, leads you to some pretty solid answers if you go into an investigation on it. Should they be in the land leads you to a dead end. So I think that was one of the discoveries that we made. My husband and I, as we got involved in the city of Ariel, and it really happened on a trip that my husband took back in 1997 and met the mayor, that famous crazy mayor, his name was Ron Nachman, who had dropped 2 tents out of a helicopter onto those barren heights and started the city of Ariel in Samaria. And so much of Ezekiel 36 to 37 really details what that would be like to begin and rebuild the cities of Samaria in particular. So I think we were fascinated with that understanding that that was actually going on, and then to meet a real life character, almost a Joshua ben Nun of modern times that was actually creating a new dynamic on the mountains there, I think we were very interested in how we could participate and support those efforts. Of course, during the 1990s, the Jews were pouring out of Russia. So when we came into the Tel Aviv Ben Gurion airport, it was wall to wall Russian Jews. So all you have to do is kind of flip open your Bible and start looking at Jeremiah 16, Jeremiah 31, and this understanding that there would be a return from the land of the north, specifically, that the Jews would come out in droves out of the land of the north, and they would replant themselves on the mountains of Samaria. And so we were captured by the understanding of that, and it led us to want to participate and find a way that we could be relevant inside that situation. So we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, we were Christians living in the United States. I grew up in a Presbyterian home and church where we had a real replacement theology. So Israel meant nothing. We had already replaced the Jews, the Christians had. So,
okay. Can you explain that for a second again, just for our audience? When you say replacement theology or the negation of that, what does that look like?
Well, replacement theology in very, very simplistic terms, and I'm not going to elaborate largely, but replacement theology is just that sense that the Christians, when in accepting the Jewish Messiah, replaced the Jews. That is, we stepped in as the newly blessed people and saw ourselves as really the administrators of the presence of God. And so it was a sense of the Jews are out for rejecting Messiah and the Christians are in. That's the most simplistic terms I can give you. There are whole books written on it.
So that's a great point of departure. And then you're saying, that's something that you grew up on. And I've heard it argued that the overwhelming majority of the Christian community, almost independent of what particular brand, if you will, of Christianity someone observes, that replacement theology is actually pretty prevalent. It's actually the norm, not the exception to the norm. Is that correct?
It certainly has been for 2,000 years. And so in the founding of the modern state of Israel, you've watched a lot of seminaries and theology schools across the world. You've watched the Catholic Church repudiate much of that horrible anti-Semitic belief system. There is still a poisonous root of that all throughout the world. But there is a turning. There has been a shift that has taken place as the prophecies have unfolded over the nation of Israel. The founding of the modern state of Israel has brought about a turn, a shift in some of that thinking. Certainly for us it did, and for many.
Meaning when you, as you said before, you kind of open the scriptures and you look in front of you and say, oh, wait, this is that right in front of me. It's a little bit difficult to say these Jews were just, an exception to the rule or a passing phenomenon. They've actually, again, as we mentioned earlier, it's this fulfillment of prophecy. It's coming full circle, and it's kind of hard to overlook that.
Yes, it's very hard to overlook it. And I think God, particularly with Bruce and I, really illuminated it. In other words, you can read your Bible and you can see it, but it takes that real breath of God to help you step into it. And for us, in our case, for a lifetime, we're not going anywhere. I mean, we've been doing this for 28 years.
Wow.
We've been involved that long. So we've understood this very, very on parallel tracks. Yes, what the scriptures are saying, what we're seeing there, and also just God's breath on our face, really being led along by the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. That has been the whole deal for us. And so I think in getting involved in the city of Ariel, there were immediate needs. I remember Bruce and I, we were in a 40-day time of fasting and prayer, which we've only done that once, by the way. If you do it right, once is enough,
wow.
By the way.
Yeah, that's pretty intense.
Pretty intense. And Bruce was really fasting. I was eating, but we just had a time marked off, a season of time that was really prayerful back in 1997, and it changed our lives forever, because it was at that time God really revealed to us to pick up Israel. And I think in so doing, we just asked, how do we become relevant? How do we do this? And the needs were just myriad. You know, when you see Jews pouring out of Russia with suitcases in their hands and their babies, and they don't have a set of diapers 4 hours from now, well, the needs were prominent. And so we just looked for those ways to try to help at that time. We got help with the schooling and education system, getting computers in the schools, getting a radio station for the city of Ariel, doing things that were really going to help the city grow. And then, and they were sort of siloed out. And then we developed a further relationship, and that was really picking up on, as I said originally, that we have a ranch in Northern California, and it's one of the top leadership programs in the United States for high school students. And so we got involved and began to develop a student exchange program between JH Ranch and the city of Ariel. And students would come to the JH Ranch to go through our 2-week program in the wilderness. And then we would bring our college students to Israel for a week, and they would stay in the homes and go experience Hanukkah during December. And wow, we set sail in something that became a very dynamic partnership and relationship involving the next generation, and then led us into a vision where the mayor and I worked on building a national leadership site on the mountains of Samaria, right there. And I'll sum this point up by just saying the prophecy where Jeremiah, if you can imagine, surrounded by this horrible, abhorrent Gentile army, this Babylonian pressure that being taken away into Babylon, he has this epiphany. And you see it in Jeremiah 31, where he is looking ahead to the regathering of Israel back into the land. But more importantly than that the Gentiles are going to show up. And so we see in Jeremiah 31, again, you will plant vineyards on the mountains of Samaria. The farmers will plant them and enjoy their fruit. And there'll be a day when the watchmen cry out, "Come, let us go up to the Lord our God." Well, that word watchman is only used one time in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh. And that word is Natsrim, which literally means the Gentile branch or the Gentile believers. So you go back over that again. The Gentile believers are going to be in the unfolding of modern Israel. They're going to participate. They're going to be standing there. So we have really envisioned ourselves cooperating with God around that understanding to be there for Israel. So that's played a big part in the building of a national platform inside the state of Israel today for leadership development.
So I want to talk about that national platform in just a moment. I'm going to hang on the note that you just shared because I think there's so much in what you're describing to us, Heather. First of all, you started with just the recognition of prophecy coming true today, but then you stepped into that. It's one thing, again, to watch that from the sidelines or from afar, or even possibly come on a tour of Israel and say, wow, this is phenomenal, it's real. But that doesn't mean that people are going to roll their sleeves up and do something about it. And you've done this, as you said, for the last 28 years. That's pretty amazing. You've done so in a way, and I actually want to talk about this leadership center that is now here, this national leadership center that's now here in Ariel. But I also want to pause for a moment because perhaps some of our listeners don't really appreciate the nature of the relationship between Christians and Jews. We talked about why a Christian would want to be involved in Israel. But what about, you mentioned exchange programs. And I have to be honest with you, Heather, and I know you know this about me, but I've always been super sensitive about who's involved in what kind of interactions, because I think that, the Jews have a historically justified defensive posture to other cultures. And I would even say that myself, when I was first asked by the same Ron Nachman to join the team in Ariel and work with the city's international partners, primary of which are largely Christian communities and individuals and leaders such as yourself and Bruce, I had to take a step back and say, Ron, I'm not so sure this is my cup of tea. I'm an observant Jew. And how does that even work? And I've personally, for what it's worth, been in study about this for the last I joined the team, I guess, in 2009. So since then, again, upwards of 15 years. And it is a journey. I think it does require further study and appreciation, and that mutual respect that we started with earlier. So if anyone's watching or listening and saying, I'm not so sure about that, how does that work? The answer is it needs to be done very, very carefully. And again, that mutual respect is that bottom line level. And so it warrants further study and discussion, but it also doesn't mean, again, to sit on the sidelines and not let things happen. Every single day, Christians are visiting Israel. Every single day, Israelis are traveling the world. We're in a global, just village. Everyone knows everybody. And so let's not ignore these opportunities. Let's figure out how to work with them and create those mutually beneficial development opportunities, something that will serve as a blessing or what we would call a win-win. And so sorry for hanging on that, Heather. I just wanted to make that clear because I know that some people just almost, I wouldn't say every day, but on a regular basis, they keep asking me these questions. And I don't want to oversimplify. I think it's something that warrants a life journey.
I think so too. And I think relationships are that way as well. And they are a lifetime journey. And to step into friendship means that there is mutual respect. There's a real understanding of the other person. There's a seeking to be valuable to the other person, as well as to value who they are and their identity. And I think that's one thing that Bruce and I have always really sought to do and understand is with anybody, Christians or Jews or Muslims, really to be able to understand the person. And, at the heart of real true authority and leadership is compassion. And compassion can go a long way in a relationship because it's always reaching out for the other. It's not trying to satisfy one's own personal needs. It's really seeking the success of the other person. And I think that's been our motive from the beginning is how can we step in if our allegiance and our entire calling around the nation of Israel has been from God himself. It has not come from the Jews. We were not struck by the Jews to do this. We've been called by God, sent into his mission, his calling for the nation of Israel. That certainly separates things out a bit, and then he is able to work through anybody he wants to.
That's
really,
amazing.
he can.
So,
he can work through anybody he wants to.
So I just want to be clear. We're hearing, I think, some really, really critical points. And the first one is this idea, and this is at the core of, you are what you give, that fundamentally it's about how we treat the other, not how we focus on ourselves. This isn't about getting brownie points for myself in that kind of, I would say, almost adolescent way of thinking about what's in it for me. But it's more about what is my role, my purpose. And that's the second point of this point about service, right? Yes, you're providing needs, for immigrant families that have come home and returned and fulfilled that biblical prophecy, but you're doing it in the service of God, which is a really critical point. I think that's really, really helpful. I find that
it's the point. It's the point, and it's the thesis statement. There's not another one. In other words, nobody can sustain a 28-year calling involving Israel and wars in the West Bank and all that we've been through. If I was just simply being called by the Jews, I would not come. I'm so sorry. But it has had to come from God. And when God does that, he sustains it. He is the keeper of us, right?
Yeah.
He knows how to keep us going, right?
Right. A 28-year favor is a long favor, right? You don't do that just because you're friends. You do
That's
that because of a calling, as you just described.
Yes.
So Heather,
but he's the one that gives the love and compassion, the sustaining love and compassion, and unconditionally so.
Well, he makes good on his promises, right? That's what we're talking about. It's good to do business with God,
Yes.
So Heather, let's take this to the next level because you're seeing things, you're understanding, you're appreciating the opportunities, and you got this, hit the ground running approach to making things happen in Israel and filling a need. But you did not stop with, well, there's a need for food or diapers. You went way, way, way beyond that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think, Avi, in building and working with the Mayor Ron Nachman, working with the Ministry of Education leaders who actually ended up coming to JH Ranch to see our program, I think the efficacy of what we were doing in California and the whole process in getting another generation to come into more selfless type leadership, that is unselfish leadership. That's not seeking the success of the other person versus and coming into servant leadership versus sort of this top down, I'm going to tell you what to do type leadership. And so the Ministry of Education was highly impacted by the notion that that could happen inside of an experiential learning facility. That you could actually bring in some of the values of the Tanakh, that servant leadership, and you could actually bring in Joshua and Caleb and bring it into a secular nation. It didn't require rabbis and synagogues to do that. And so once that was established, I think that was the buy-in from 40 of the top leaders of Israel's Ministry of Education. And they said, well, let's go with that. And we formed a partnership and built the national leadership site on the mountains of Samaria, right down the street from Joshua ben Nun and where he's buried, and Caleb. And so I think the success, you ask yourself, why has it been successful? Why have we had more than 130,000 Israelis and Arab Israelis and Druze come into the city of Ariel? It's the highest constituency base in Samaria today. Why is that working? Well, I think there is a drawing card, a hunger and a thirst among so many that are living in Israel today to try to get to, why am I here? What is my purpose for being here? What are my values? What am I going to live? Who am I trying to become? And I think we're offering that space. We're offering that opportunity for some of that real important discovery, personal discovery. So that's what we've done. We've built that national leadership platform. We've got Jewish teams, leadership teams that have really undergone that biblical heritage training that are now in the schools, over 500 schools. And now we have another campus that we've just opened in Jerusalem. So things are growing on this front.
So, Heather, I think that's amazing. Again, something worth pausing for just a moment. You're talking about this universal appeal to Israelis of all walks of life. For those who are unfamiliar,
Yes.
there are Israelis who are not Jewish.
That's
there are
right.
Israeli Arabs, and some of them are Muslim, and some of them are Christian. There are the Jews, and there are other minority groups in Israel that are Israelis. You're also hosting people who are not Israelis, international groups that will come through as well. That's the minority of the number of participants, but that happens as well. And so there's this, on the one hand, this deep connection to the Tanakh, to Hebraic scripture, and those deep roots. And at the same time, it's appeal, this universal appeal, by using modalities that are not the sermon at the synagogue, but rather this experiential learning, opportunity, which for anyone who's ever done ODT, outdoor training, you know what it's like to really be fully immersed in an experience. But what if that experience was informed by, again, these deep faith-rooted principles and applied to a universal community that's not necessarily reading Hebraic scripture from a Jewish perspective, but wants to be informed by it? Does that make sense?
That makes so much sense. And I think, Avi, the whole notion is that, you want, as far as Israel has a real mandate that no other nation has. The Christians don't have it. It's Israel. Israel has a mandate from God to be a light to all nations, to be that beacon on the hill. Well, if that's true, if that is real, and that is to be believed, there's the most real sense that you can't hold an abstract view of God, that he's somewhere out there in the distance, if he's there, and never put your trust in him. And so in the most real sense, it's bringing that biblical heritage, the leaders out of the Tanakh, those that really made their mark in society, and helping this next generation be able to put their lives inside of those leaders and create reflection on it, so that there's that place where you can personally identify, because to lose your history is to lose your identity. Your identity actually comes out of those history-making adventures we see in the Bible. So how important it is for another generation in Israel, the next generation, maybe a Joshua generation, right? Will be able to put their trust in God.
So illustrate that for us, Heather. What does it mean to put your trust in God or even in your peers when you're up on a rope course?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think in going through a process where you're looking at, say, the life of Joshua, and you've got some sort of a climbing up an alpine tower, okay, and he's working with Caleb, and they're having to figure out, and so the student steps into that, okay. This is the storyline. Now you're going to have to solve some problems to make it from point A to point B. It's going to stretch you. It's going to stretch you physically, mentally, and you're going to have to depend on your peers in order to get to the top.
Don't forget emotionally, Heather.
Yes, and emotionally.
Yeah.
So you've got to solve these problems. You've got to ask each other questions. You've got to hold on to each other to actually make it there. Well, all of that brings into the opportunity to ask some poignant questions around that, about what it is like. How did Joshua depend on those leaders that were around him? How did he depend on God in a situation that was absolutely impossible? His army was smaller. There was no way to win it. Well, how did he put his trust in God? What did he do? And then you open the Tanakh and you read about what he did. Well, they've just gone through a process that was, not similar to Joshua's, but it had some of the same stretching and pressure. And then you look and say, well, Joshua went through it like this. He actually prayed to God. He got on his knees and asked God for help and asked God for a solution, and God gave it to him. Well, this is the idea here in the experiential learning environment, is you're trying to bring about an opportunity for a transformational experience where they're looking at something and going, okay, I've seen things in a classroom about leadership. Now I'm having to get out there and really stretch myself, use leadership skills, but I'm also looking at the Tanakh and our Jewish values and our heritage as a point of inflection and reflection for myself.
So what I'm hearing, Heather, and correct me if I'm wrong, the experience of leadership is not something that we just study in a text alone. To just study it in a text, we might even overlook, this is my understanding, the leadership value of what, again, the Tanakh, Hebraic scripture is teaching us. Instead, we look at it as perhaps stories or background or history, but not what did these people actually experience. And so the experiential understanding of our heritage is kind of piece one. And then piece two is, okay, I have got that context. How does that actually speak to me? Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I think that's the transformational part, Avi, is that point where somebody looks at it and they're not reading it just as a history book, but there is a sense of jumping off that cliff and going, I want to apply what Joshua did to my own life. This book of the law will not depart from your mouth, but you'll study it day and night and apply it into your own life. And I think that's the aim of this. It's just that getting personal ownership to your faith, to your heritage. That's sort of the bottom line.
So Heather, I actually have a question that literally just popped into my head. I've never asked you this before, but I think it's pertinent. What about somebody who comes into the Leadership Center and they didn't come with a faith perspective? Like you mentioned, there's secular people in Israel. And I know you mentioned Ron Nachman. Ron was, to me, there was this kind of almost comical exchange. He would tell visitors that, oh, I'm not a religious person. And people would look at him like, you're building the mountains of Samaria, turning them into a thriving city. What's not religious about that? But the way that we, unfortunately, I think, categorize people in Israel is, are people Sabbath observant or kosher observant? And that's when we say observant or not, religious or not. But at the core of it, this kind of expression of living out prophecy would be something that someone, again, certainly looking at things from the outside, would say, of course, this is an exceedingly religious person. But what about someone who might experience things that way, but like Ron, who said, I'm not coming at this from a faith perspective, but I am looking to my heritage to inform what leadership looks like. How does that work, just as you see that kind of experience?
Well, I think Ron Nachman is such a great case in point, because you said it exactly right. I mean, he was so in his own mind, so secular and just running furiously to go build a city. But as time went on and he understood much more what he was doing, it led him into something much more personal with God. And I got that window, of course, knowing him for so long and working so closely with him. I got to see that sort of transformational process that he went through. And I think that that's really the case for all of us. We start out over here and we think we know everything. We really do. We've got our own mindset. We've got our own leadership model that we think we want to live through, or not. We might be atheist. We might be, wherever we're coming from, agnostic. We might be coming from an angle of bitterness, from tragedy and trauma. It does not mean that God can't impact our lives no matter where we are. And I think the experiential learning environment opens that possibility up in a totally different way, where you're not just sitting on, in some formal synagogue, but you're actually really able to let some of those stories and some of those biblical heritage understanding be able to penetrate some of those places in your life. And I think that's what's happening every day at the Leadership Center. That's what I think. That's what we're seeing.
Right. That's amazing, just to see a person themselves might be experiencing things in a certain way, but you, as someone with your life perspective and life experience, you look at that and you say, well, there's something that's going on in a person's life that maybe perhaps, if I'm understanding you correctly, they might not have the words for, but
Right.
it's of meaning and significance. And so we do know that people come away with a very, oftentimes very intense and often life influencing, sometimes life shaping, and sometimes what you said before, transformational experience. And that may be somewhere along those lines. So it's just interesting as we, what people experience themselves and how we might be able to look at that. But I think it's really a great segue to the next step, something else I really wanted to ask you about. Because not only is there this leadership center that you and Bruce have been critically involved in from the very beginning, and really you're just taking it ever since establishment to what it's grown to become and where it's going. But there's another layer. I remember, I'm guessing about 2010, I remember I'm sitting at a gas station, get a call from Heather Johnston. Hey, Avi, I just want to let you know that we're going to be bringing congressmen to Ariel to see the Leadership Center. And I'm kind of like, I think that's awesome, Heather. But because Ariel is east of the Green Line, which means it's in an area that we refer to as Judea and Samaria, much of the world refers to it as the West Bank, because U.S. policy doesn't lend itself to those congressional delegations, I'm not sure how you're going to bring those folks. And that turned not into a delegation, but an entire organization that's been bringing your annual delegations ever since. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, let's just do it this way. Let's just understand that one thing leads to another. It's real basic. One thing leads to another. And nobody sets out necessarily to go, with a big, huge, vision in mind, and they actually go make that vision happen exactly as they saw it. I think for us, again, we were on the mountains of Samaria. We were building a national leadership center, and if that weren't enough, it was something that I felt very like God was speaking to me about. I really do. For a period of years, go take the Congress of the United States through Judea and Samaria. And I didn't know a congressman. I'd never met a congressman. So this was not in my orbit. It was not in my realm. I didn't even know how to go find a congressman. But I did understand that our State Department, our U.S. State Department, was not allowing U.S. officials to come across the Green Line or into the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria. They could go to Ramallah and meet with Abu Mazen, but they were not allowed to come into the Jewish communities. And so I think that as I continued in relationship with Ron Nachman, I understood how important that would be to have our Congress get a paradigm of the entire demographic reality of Judea and Samaria, known by most as the West Bank. So we set sail. It was an incredible story. I have a book called Uncommon Favor, by the way, and I'm sitting here, I was reading it this morning thinking about what we were going to talk about, but that story is in here, really, of how we came to being able to do that. And it was just one of those things where at the time, back in 2010, Eric Cantor, the majority leader of the U.S. Congress, he's Jewish, was looking for how we could take a secondary tour for members of Congress, senior leaders, because AIPAC was bringing the freshmen, and how we could bring them to Israel and just continue to educate. Because some people are in Congress for 20 years. A lot of people are. And they make their one, voyage to Israel in their freshman year, and then they never go back except for maybe a 24-hour period here or a 24-hour period here. And so a real vacuum in education can occur over that length of time. So that was what we set out to do, and he helped me populate those tours. I ended up rather miraculously in a conversation with him that somebody opened the door for me to meet with him, and he happened to be the top leader of the Congress looking for somebody like me that would do it. So we found each other. And then he helped populate the tours, and we took the first members of Congress on the House Armed Services Committee to Israel back in 2011.
So that's actually another critical point to this, which is you're looking at committee members and not necessarily the freshmen, but as you said, folks who are more senior in Congress and actually senior in terms of their influence. You've brought senators, you've brought both sides of the aisle, even though it's a little hard to do that in today's political environment. But you've managed to really do that. I think, I want everyone to hear about what you've actually accomplished. But I just want to quickly segue back to a little bit backwards to where we were before, because we talked about the same experience that different people might experience very differently, and they might understand what they experienced in a different way. But the question is, what are you presenting to them? And I think, and I've heard this time and time again from the members of Congress whom you've brought, their experience is fundamentally different than, and this is not to denigrate any other organization, whether it's AIPAC or otherwise, but it's fundamentally different than any other trip that they've been on to Israel. And that's really interesting because, there's trips that are focused on strategy and security and the kind of things that Congress might be interested in. There are other trips that are biblically oriented, a lot of the themes that you mentioned before, but you found a really interesting way to blend things in a way that I can't possibly imagine that another congressional tour is doing. You're bringing them experiences, you're bringing them to places that they're not going otherwise, but you're also not afraid to talk again about faith.
I think that's been, a real core element to that. And when I was in theology school, I had the privilege of learning about the Abrahamic covenant, and I spent quite a bit of my time writing on that subject matter and really understanding the importance of that as the headwaters to try to paint a picture of the journey of the Jews and the nation of Israel. And being able to grasp that, I think it became clear to me that we needed to help the leaders have a real holistic approach to Israel. I mean, because you can come in from a geopolitical angle, you can come in from an angle even of faith. I want to go to Jerusalem, and I want to go where Jesus was crucified and buried, and I want to, and you can even come from that angle. But there's a whole other side that is so important for a national leader, an international leader. Any king, any ruler, any congressman, any parliamentarian needs to approach Israel through the study of Isaiah. Absolutely. Why is that? Well, God anticipated that rulers were going to come and participate in the restoration of the modern state of Israel, a future Israel, when the Jews would come in from the four quarters of the earth, rebuild their cities. All of that would take place, but it would actually happen through the support and collaboration of Gentile kings. That is, they're going to bring wealth to you. Israel. They're going to join into treaties with you. We just saw the Abraham Accords treaties begin in 2020. I was there on the White House lawn for that extraordinary day. But I remember telling the prime minister in a meeting with him, the kings are coming to you. Just get ready. The kings are coming. The nations are coming. That is what God said he would do in the days of the restoration of modern Israel. So I think in thinking of that, what I've wanted to do is to help members of Congress be able to get that picture, because with that picture comes some obligations, comes some duties, comes a sense of conviction about the state of Israel and their part. Let's go over Isaiah 60, 10 and 11, Avi. Very, very important passage. There's lots of them, but let's just look at that one alone. The foreigners will rebuild your walls, O Israel, and their kings will serve you. Though in anger I struck you, with great compassion will I bring you back, so that men may bring you the wealth of the nations. Their kings led in procession to you. For the nation that will not serve you will perish and be utterly destroyed. Well, that's an extraordinary prophecy. You just start breaking that thing out line by line, and you see how some of that has already occurred, that the foreigners have come. They've played a dynamic role in the rebuilding of the walls of Israel. How so? Well, we've got Iron Dome today, right? Mm-hmm. We've got David's sling. We've got Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and literally a missile defense program that protects all of the cities of Israel. The whole nation is protected by walls, walls. And
pretty
so
high tech and impressive walls, but walls.
Well, none of that would have happened. None of it would have happened unless there were Gentile kings and rulers that stepped in and said, we need to participate in this.
And Heather, if I can jump in on that, I don't want to say that none of it would have happened without, but I can say that some of it happened thanks to the work that you've done. And I think it's really important to note that one of the things that separates what you do from maybe other congressional tours to Israel, perhaps congressional tours anywhere in the world, is that you follow through with this hands-on, the implementation. And so you're not going to implement on behalf of Congress, but you will inform and educate enough so that congresspeople will know what it is that they can do to take action. And one of those things was indeed with Iron Dome.
Yeah. It's a great story. The missile defense collaboration has required the United States of America. They've been the pocketbook for it. They've helped produce a lot of things in the United States. And so it's been a very dynamic partnership, but it really began and took off in 2011 when we brought the chairman on the House Armed Services Committee to Israel. It was our very first tour, U.S. Israel Education Association, which is my organization. And we got to Israel, and Colorado Congressman Doug Lamborn kept pulling on my shirt saying, we need to go see Iron Dome. Nobody's ever seen it before. And so I had to come up with a way to go see the Iron Dome, and it was classified, of course. So in our meeting with the Prime Minister, he said, well, Heather, where are you going to go next after this? And I said, well, we actually need to go see the Iron Dome missile defense system. And he kind of looked at me like, I can't believe you just asked that. And I said, I've got the chairman on the House Armed Services Committee. These are the people that are going to be funding all of the future. They would really like to see it. And so by the next day, the Prime Minister had it declassified, and we were roaring over these mountains to go see an Iron Dome missile defense battery and have the explanation. Well, it was that group of 5 members that really launched it. They went back to Washington, D.C. They pulled 54 members of Congress together. We brought in the experts to educate on it, and by 2.5 months later, the budget for Iron Dome was tripled from $230 million to $690 million. And that really launched the missile defense program. That really did it. And then there was David's sling just a year or two later. And these all ran concurrent, these missile defense boosts, this building of missile defense weaponry, so that Jerusalem could be protected, not just Sderot down on the border, not just the border of, between Lebanon and Syria, but really the major population centers, Jerusalem and Haifa and Tel Aviv. And that's what this did. When Congress stepped in and began to fund all of this and look for ways to build this collaboration, that's how Israel, in the midst of now these ever increasing wars coming out of Gaza, missiles now launched over the border, and they just, kind of fell right into a little neighborhood over the border. Now they're coming into Tel Aviv. So this was a big, big step. It ran concurrent to a growing threat on all the borders of Israel. And so very, very thankful and proud that our organization got to help launch the missile defense collaboration.
We're recording this in November 2025, and we are a couple of weeks after the 20 points deal that President Trump brokered with multiple nations to stop the war in Gaza, return the hostages. And whereas when this episode airs, I don't know where that state of affairs is going to be. We do know that had there not been Iron Dome and the other missile defense programs of Israel on October 7th and thereafter, things would have been unbearably worse than they were for Israel. And because things have been turned around so much, and the attack in Iran and other developments that have, the beeper attack with Hezbollah in Lebanon, some of these strategic wins for Israel, which have positioned Israel in a fundamentally different place than it was before October 7th, those were only possible because we could survive the barrage of rocket fire. And there's just countless examples of that. We won't go into it now. But with that kind of success, I want to point out one additional kind of insight that I gleaned from your experiences, and it's really been such an opportunity to be able to work with you on this, Heather. But that insight is, for me, I think people often distinguish, almost in an artificial way, between the world of faith and the world of pragmatism. It's almost as though they're polar opposites. And here we're seeing that you've found a way with this genuine authenticity and your drive, your commitment to God, just straightforward, right? Your commitment to God, which drives you to be open and honest, speak to the hearts of your guests, whether they're folks that come on a bus that are visiting from Alabama, or Congress people, the kings and queens who you referred to earlier, and speak directly to the heart on the one hand, and then get to the hard-punching, bottom-line reality of what needs to be accomplished. And those things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're actually complementary. And I think really that's something that you've brought to the scene that it's just not, it's not elsewhere, but maybe others can learn from that. Heather, the work that you've done with these congressional delegations actually doesn't end there, because actually in the process of bringing the Congress people here and understanding not only the Israeli communities that they couldn't come visit previously, but you've given them access to Arab communities that they wouldn't have visited otherwise. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, because I think to come into Judea and Samaria is to come into mixed company and to really understand that the reality on the ground is that Hebron and Bethlehem are full of Palestinians, and that your largest Palestinian city is Hebron, really the second holiest site for the Jews. So it's got quite a bit of complication to it. And the importance, all importance, that if we're going to actually educate Congress, and that is to be very, very equitable in doing so, you have to introduce them to the Palestinians who are living in this area, and those that really do want to and or are working with Israelis. And so we really set out to do that from the very beginning, to make sure we were connecting Congress to those very cooperative Palestinians that really wanted to live side by side with Israel in this region. And that led us to Hebron. It led us to a friend of ours, both of ours, Avi, that you led the way. You led the way on this, to Sheikh Ashraf Jabri and his 40,000 member clan, and to his friends who were in economic and business opportunities. You all formed the Judea-Samaria Chamber of Commerce together, and it really gave us a way to show Congress that these two parties can come together. There's a way for Palestinians and Israelis to work together inside Judea and Samaria. It is the future. If there is to be a future, it is going to have to be around economic development. So we really have set out to bring about a paradigm shift where most members of Congress would look on and say, ne'er the twain do meet. The Palestinians are over here. They live in their area. The Jews live over here. And we changed that paradigm by helping them come into the industrial parks to meet some of your friends, to meet so many of the Palestinians in Hebron that are eagerly desiring economic development and prosperity with the Israelis.
So, I think it's really, really critical to add that piece. And there's so many stories to share around that. Time is short, but really so many stories to share around that because, again, I would assume that perhaps the average listener, just like they might not appreciate that faith and pragmatism are not mutually exclusive, they might not appreciate, probably don't, just how much work is being done between Israelis and Palestinians today on the day-to-day. And the fact that you introduce that to the Congress people and you see the aha moment in their eyes and you see that, wow, I really didn't appreciate this until I came, is why it's so critical to share that. And, all of the narratives and all of the noise and all of the stuff that's going on, the superficial, criticism of both sides and both camps and everybody's bad and everybody's wrong, it's just not real when you get to reality, when you get into this very, very authentic perspective on what's going on here on the ground. And it's just such a service of what you do to bring people to actually see this reality and the different facets that it has to it. But Heather, this has been complex work. You mentioned the complexities. It's been hard work. There have been some real challenges along the way. I don't want you to mention all of them because, people's time is limited and this episode can't go on forever. But is there one kind of challenge that stands out or an incident, something that made you take a step back for a second and double check, am I still in this? Can I still persevere, move forward? That same sort of charge that you began with 28 years ago, is it something that you can still remain, at it, at this pace and at this rate for so long?
Well, I think, Avi, it goes back to that original point about who is guiding you, who is leading you, who is sending you. And so when that's squared away, then there is that incredible ability to stay with God and to go with him through the thick and the thin. We have had some very low points. And I think one of the low points most recently was October 7th. I mean, basically the whole notion of Palestinians and Israelis coming together to work together flew out the window because nobody trusted each other. And so we ended up back at sort of a square one mentality about all of that. And it really was a caving in of that vision, at least temporarily. But I do think that on the other side of October 7th, and now we're 2 years past it, coming hopefully to an end of war, I think we're watching more than ever Palestinians that are living in Hebron, again, on the rise more than ever, want to come out from underneath the Palestinian Authority and have some sort of other dynamic where they're governing themselves and plugging into the Abraham Accords nations, working with Israel. I think that resolve is there more than ever. And I think that is what is encouraging. That is the flower that's coming out of the dirt of a war, and something that felt like we had lost all of our momentum. And it's just simply not true. We have not lost all our momentum. I think we've gained some momentum on the other side of this war with certain people and certain groups of people in certain cities that are inside Judea and Samaria today.
Yeah, and so I think that's, first of all, very informative and very, again, real. This, journey that our guests are sharing with this conversation of understanding how we can give and how we can persevere in the way that we give, contribute, even when things can be as horrific as October 7th and the aftermath. I think that's really something to think quite a bit about. And you're right, that kind of let's look back at that perspective, or let's look back and gain perspective and see where things might possibly move forward is helpful indeed. What an excursion through the world of faith, Israel, partnerships between Christians and Jews, leadership, kings and queens. We've seen quite a bit here. But we asked before, where have been some of the lows perhaps? Mm-hmm. What about the possibility of doing even better? Are we at this point, Heather, with all of the successes that you've had, where you can just look back and say, you know what? I've lived a life of purpose. I've done my part. It's time to retire. Or do we keep at it? And if we keep at it, is there possibly a way of giving even better?
I think that is such a great question. And boy, do I ever think about that. Sometimes I think maybe, boy, it would be really, really nice to peel back here and retire. Because now we have grandchildren and now we've got, 28 years of being in Israel. But no, the answer is no. We keep at it. And I think that as long as we have breath in our lungs, as long as we have cognitive skills, as long as we're able to keep going, we are destined. Our joy, our life-giving experience is found in giving. And so I think through the lens of giving, I think of three areas. One, I think about we give our time. I think that we give our talent, and we give our treasure. That is our finances. And those are really the areas of the human experience. That's who we are in the giving of ourselves. I know that I give as much time as I possibly can, and I'm going to continue to do that. I think I'm giving financially as much as I can. Bruce and I both are. And then I think the area that I'm a little bit more introverted than the average person. So sometimes I don't want to use my talent all the time, like communication, for example. I'd rather go up and read a book or go be on the phone and, connect with somebody that I need to connect with to keep advancing all this vision that we're doing. But some of that talent is an area where I need to work on and to invest more of that talent. And so I'm thinking about that.
Well, Heather, as with this entire conversation, that is a brutally honest comment and thought. And as a bystander, I would say, well, I think you're working pretty well with your talents. But who am I to say? I just think that notion of commitment to giving and purpose will drive us to always want to level up. And I think it's just amazing that you're thinking that way. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Heather, really for this conversation, for the giving that you do, for the partnerships, for the friendship. And really, it's been such an amazing journey, and there's so much more on the horizon. So really, thank you so very much for giving.
Yes. Well, Avi, we would not want to be on this journey without you. We so appreciate you, and thanks for this wonderful serendipity today.
There is so much in this conversation with Heather, so much insight about why Christians give to Israel and what innovative partnerships between different faith communities can look like. Heather's story reminds us that people give not just because they're trying to rescue others, but oftentimes because they're responding to a personal calling, something that they understand is bigger than themselves. Whatever faith community you might come from, the discipline of acting based upon your belief consistently, sacrificially over time is noteworthy. So here's this week's giving challenge. Take a moment to reflect on why you give. Not what you give, not who you give to, but what motivates you to give in the first place. What belief, value, sense of responsibility is driving those choices when it comes to your giving? And is there a way to live that out more intentionally through your time, your voice, your resources? Giving becomes most powerful when it's driven by your identity, by knowing who you are, and by appreciating that you are what you give. So with that giving challenge in mind, the challenge to identify why you give, let me take this opportunity to thank you for being part of this giving community. If you value this conversation, consider sharing it with someone else. As we look beyond ourselves, let's consider sharing the gifts that we've received with others. And before we close, thank you to Victoria Hurst for her generous support of You Are What You Give and for sharing the gift of better giving. Thanks for listening. If this conversation resonates, please subscribe. It's a simple step that helps us share the word and build a community that values what we give more than what we take.